All right, so basically what I'll do is I'm just going to go through this presentation as I would if I was presenting it, and then I'll put this PowerPoint into the group so that you guys can use it to start booking some sessions. Cool? So I'm going to share screen, which means I won't be able to see you. So if you have any questions, just unmute yourself. All right. So I just start with an introduction to myself. I'm Tiffany. I've been a coach in one form or another for the past 18 years. And after I had my own personal breakdown / breakthrough about 5 years ago, I realized the power of our mind, and that most of the population just kind of sweeps their issues under the carpet, and that if we actually want to change our life, we actually have to deal with the stuff that's there. So tonight I'm just going to give you some insight into how our unconscious mind works. We'll look at what the things that you need to know around how our mind works and how you can get your unconscious mind to better serve you. So tonight I'm just going to start with some numbers for you, and then I always just ask questions to keep people engaged, and I just say, on an average day, how many thoughts do you think that we have a day? We have 60,000 thoughts on an average day. Now, of these 60,000 thoughts, what percentage would you say are negative? And then I say 80%, and only 5% of those thoughts are new. So we wonder why we get stuck in these negative patterns of behavior, and it's because only 5% of the thoughts that we have every day are completely new. We've never had those thoughts before. So 95% of our day, we're going through the exact same loop or the exact same patterns that we have in the past. And of those thoughts that we have in a day, those 60,000, 80% are negative. And as we go through today, we'll talk about how toxic that is to the body, but I'm sure you can imagine 80% negative thoughts. It's not good for our health. It's not good for us in any way. The good news is that we can rewire our brain. And so we are actually wired to have what's called a negative bias. Now, this negative bias served us from an evolutionary standpoint. It served us in that when back in the caveman days, the caveman would walk out of the cave, would hear a rustling in the bushes, would run back into the cave, and would stay there until, assuming that the rustling was coming from a saber-toothed tiger. Now, any of the cavemen who assumed that the rustling was just coming from a squirrel eventually would be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, and survival of the fittest kicks in. They wouldn't stay alive to pass along their bloodlines. So this negative bias worked in those days. It's worked to get us to where we are now from a human standpoint. It doesn't work anymore though, because we don't have saber-toothed tigers that we need to worry about. And so now, instead of having saber-toothed tigers to worry about, we see things like deadlines, angry bosses, screaming kids, phone notifications, our phone ringing, text messages, Facebook notifications, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all these things that we need to do in a day, they become modern day's proverbial saber-toothed tiger. The problem is that they stress our body in the same way. They put us into that fight or flight mode, except that none of those things can actually kill us or harm us. So what we want to do is we want to start rewiring our brain. How many people have heard of a gratitude practice before? Wait for hands to go up. So a gratitude practice is one of the most common buzzwords and fads in the personal development, mindset, mindfulness world right now. And it's because a gratitude practice starts the process of rewiring your brain. So what you do with a gratitude practice is every day you write down 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for from the day. And what this forces you to do is to stop and be present throughout the day so that you can recognize the good things happening for you. If I was to ask you in this room right now, how many of you could name 5 things that you love about yourself, or 10 things that you hate about yourself, or 5 things that went really well in your day and 10 things that went absolutely wrong? For the majority of you, the 10 things, even though it's more, would be the easier one, and that's the negative bias at play. So when we start writing down the things that we're grateful for, or the good things that happen to us throughout the day, then we have to stop and be present. Now, like anything, we can cheat our way through this. And then I tell a story about how when I finished university, for about 3 months, I had a job at Starbucks. And I ended up leaving because I couldn't figure out the order of the ordering, the venti, double pump, blah, blah. I always got it mixed up and I always got in trouble for it. But one thing I did learn while I was working at Starbucks is that all the coffees are essentially the same, just the amount of foam is different. And so a cappuccino is mostly foam. It's like 3/4 foam. And then the good stuff, or the coffee, is the bottom quarter. So you have to get through the foam to get through the good stuff. And like anything in personal development, it's like that as well. So a gratitude practice, you can fluff your way through it, which is just the foam on the top. The problem is that's not actually going to make a change to your life, and you're not going to get to the good stuff, the coffee, at the bottom of your cappuccino. And so when people start doing a gratitude practice with me, instead of just getting them to write down what the good things were or what they're grateful for, I get them to tell me why, because then that takes a little bit more effort and they have to dig a little deeper to get to that good stuff at the bottom. Now, start doing this every day, writing down 3 to 5 things. And this practice also isn't meant for the day when everything goes well. There's some days where I could name 10 things, and on those days I do name 10 things. What this practice is for the days where we can't think of anything that we want to write down. And on those days when we're really struggling, the reason that it's important to write these down is so that we can go back to that journal or back to the place that we've written them down, and we can remind ourselves of all the good things. And if nothing else, it will remind us that this too shall pass. So whatever we're going through in the moment shall pass. So that's how we start to rewire our brain to overcome that negative bias and move into a positive space. All right, so how many people think, I just want to make sure everyone's in the right room. Do you think it's possible to create long-term change? Can an old dog learn new tricks? Wait for everyone to put up their hand. And then I say, okay, cool. So here's how our brain is structured. In our brain, we have approximately 3 billion brain cells. This is our maximum lifetime capacity. You cannot grow more. Then depending on the audience, I'll make a joke saying, if you're someone like me who's had 6 concussions, I definitely do not have 3 billion brain cells anymore. If you grew up in a small town like me where there was nothing to do other than go party in a field somewhere and experiment with marijuana or other things, it's legal in Canada, so it won't draw as many eye rolls as what it would have before it was legal, but you can make a joke about, if you drank or smoked too much, then you probably don't have 3 billion brain cells anymore either. I usually talk a little bit about neuroplasticity here. So I'll say something like, when you lose a brain cell, another brain cell in your brain will pick up the function of that brain cell. So there's been studies that have been published of a newborn who had to have an entire lobe of her brain cut out because there was something wrong with it. And she went on to grow up to be a normal functioning person because the other parts of her brain took over the lobe that had been cut out. As you get older though, we have less plasticity of our brain. And so the older you get, the less likely other brain cells are going to be to pick up the function of the brain cell that died. And so that's why we typically see dementia and Alzheimer's happening in an older population. So we have a maximum of 3 billion brain cells. But what each of these brain cells can do is they grow branches or arms, which are called dendrites. Now, these dendrites are essentially little branches that grow off, and we grow a new dendrite every time we learn something new. So how many people have learned something new so far in my talk today? People put up their hand. Good, so everyone's grown at least one new dendrite. My job is done here. Just remember, the more that you can make people laugh throughout the presentation, the more that they'll connect with you and relate to you, and the more likely they are to spend their money with you. So once we grow these dendrites, our brain then goes about the process of connecting dendrites that have similar information or that are linked in some way. And so the first time that we grow a dendrite, we'll have a very weak connection. And so I like to think of these neural pathway building, which is what this creates, as digging a trench. So the first time you listen to this presentation, you're going to be taking off the first layer of dirt. And as you use the information that I talk about tonight more and more, this trench will become deeper and deeper because you're going to continue to take out new levels of dirt and new levels of dirt until eventually it becomes what we call a superhighway. And this superhighway is a path that is, you have used it so many times that the brain realizes that this is important for you, and so it wraps this path in what's called myelin sheathing so that this information travels faster between dendrites, and this activity now becomes a reflex-like behavior. So one of the reasons that people can have problems getting out of negative or disempowering behaviors or habits is because that behavior or habit has become a reflex-like behavior for them. So when I was working as a personal trainer, I've lost count of how many times I would have people come in to me and say, I was really stressed out today, and I decided I was going to go home and I was going to walk the dog to de-stress, just like you always talk about. And the next thing I know, the spoon is hitting the bottom of the ice cream bucket, and I'm like, did it again. So that's because they have a neural pathway or a superhighway around comfort eating. And so what we would have to do is we would have to fill in that trench and dig a new trench in order to replace it with a new behavior. Now, just before we look at how we can do that, here's some other numbers for you. So we have 3 billion brain cells, and each of these 3 billion brain cells can grow 10,000 dendrites. If each of our 3 billion brain cells was to grow 10,000 dendrites, the possible number of connections in our brain would be 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 11. Now, I am not a math person, so to give you a visual on what that number means, if you were to take every grain of sand from every beach in the entire world, that's what that number would represent. If you were to take every star in the known galaxy, that's what that number represents. So you have a galaxy worth of potential in your brain. You just have to figure out how to use it, and that's what I'm here to show you tonight. So I like to think of the mind as an iceberg. And just to make sure, because I'm going to use the terms conscious mind and unconscious mind a lot tonight, I want to make sure that we're on the same page when I use those terms. So what is the conscious mind? And then I'll take a couple questions. So the conscious mind is everything that we're aware of. It's the part of the iceberg above the water. Then the unconscious mind is all the things that we're unaware of. It's the part in the dark or the part under the water. So what percentage of our mind's capacity do you think, what percentage of our mind's capacity do you think is the conscious mind? And then I'll take some numbers. People usually say like 2080, 1090. If 1090 comes out, I say, if you were to read a neuropsychology textbook from the 80s or 90s, that would be right. More recently, coming out of research conducted by Dr. Snyder at the University of Sydney, he runs the Center for the Mind there, he has come to postulate that the conscious mind's capacity is really only 4%. So you hear a lot of people talking about how we use 10% of our brain. It's actually about 4%. and 96% is our unconscious mind. So 96% of what we do every single day, we have no idea why we're doing it. So what we want to do is we want to look at how we can stop using our conscious mind so much, and how we can tap into the unconscious mind more. Because Dr. Snyder also postulated that if we could get our conscious mind's capacity up to 6%, so only a 2% increase, we would all be geniuses on the level of Einstein. So, and I don't think, okay. So before I don't have a slide for this, I can put one in, or I usually use a whiteboard or a flip chart. But I say, so the reason that most people don't reach their goals or they don't hit their New Year's resolutions is because they rely on what? And I ask people, they'll answer, and then I say, we rely on willpower or discipline. Now the problem with that is that willpower and discipline is using our conscious mind. So we're using the least effective part of our brain, the 4% of the conscious mind, to attempt to make change. Now, what most people don't know about willpower is that we have a finite amount of willpower every single day. So think of willpower like a glass of water. Every morning, you wake up with a full glass of willpower or a full glass of water. And for every single decision that you make, no matter how big or how small, you tip a little bit of water out of that glass. So how many people hit the snooze button in the morning? And I'll go around, I'll see how many hands go up, I'll ask them how many times they hit snooze. So every time you hit the snooze button, that's a decision. I had a woman come to one of my workshops once who told me that she hit the snooze button 10 times. That means she's making 10 decisions before she even gets out of bed in the morning. And then she has to decide what she's going to wear, whether or not she's going to shower, what she's going to have for breakfast, what the kids are going to have for breakfast, what the kids are going to wear, what time she's going to leave for work, what route she's going to drive to work. Is she going to pack a lunch of leftovers, or is she going to buy her food? Any other decisions she has to make. So before we even leave the house in the morning, we've tipped out like a quarter of our glass of water. Then we work through the day, black pen, blue pen. Do I go to this cafe or that cafe? Should I have a smoke break right now? Should I go and get another cup of coffee? These are all decisions that we're making throughout the day that may seem menial and minimal, but they are using some of our willpower. Then we wonder why when we get home at the end of the day and we have to choose between going to the gym or sitting down and watching Grey's Anatomy with a glass of red wine is such a hard decision. We know that we want to get fitter, and yet we're so drawn to that couch. And in most cases, if somebody comes home and sits down on the couch while making that decision, they're very unlikely to get up again unless going to the gym is part of their routine. Because once that glass of water, once our willpower is gone, we revert back to whatever beliefs and whatever behaviors are stored within our unconscious mind. So if we have any beliefs around, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, it's not safe, or it's not okay for me to be fit and thin, or I hate exercising, whatever the beliefs are, then we'll revert back to those. And that's why we're unlikely to make change. So this is called decision fatigue. So if you have a goal, most productivity coaches will tell you to do the most important thing for that day to get closer to your goal first thing in the morning. This is why personal trainers in January tell people who have never worked out before to come to the gym before work first thing in the morning, because that's when they're more likely to do it. If you look at some of the most successful people in the world, Barack Obama had 10 of the exact same suit. It cuts down on a decision that he has to make every day. Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, they're known for wearing their blue jeans and their white or black t-shirt. Cuts down on a decision they have to make every day. Mark Zuckerberg eats the exact same thing for lunch every day. That takes out a decision as well. So if you insist on using willpower, make sure that you set yourself up for success so that you're doing the most important thing for the day first, And so you're more likely to actually accomplish your goal. Otherwise, if you want to guarantee yourself success, then we need to start rewiring the beliefs that are held within the unconscious mind. And we'll look at some ways that we can do that tonight. Now, every second, we have 2 million pieces of information that comes into our unconscious mind and gets stored. How many people have seen the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out? So if you remember in that movie, they're in the quote unquote control center, which is the conscious mind in that movie, because the conscious mind does think it's in control. We make decisions based on our unconscious mind and emotion, and then we back it up with the logic and reasoning from our conscious minds. So when they get lost in the vastness of the unconscious mind, you see one part in the movie where there's these like floor to ceiling bookshelves with all these balls in them. And those are the memories. And that's really what our unconscious mind is like. And every second, 2 million balls are getting stored in those bookshelves. Now, consciously, we're only aware of 134 pieces that are further broken down into 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. So if you notice, most countries in the world, phone numbers are generally no more than 10 digits, and they're broken into chunks of 2, 3, and 4, because 10 is the absolute maximum that our conscious mind can remember. Now, how do we get from 2 million to 134 pieces? There's a couple things that we do. We delete information. So for example, you're probably not thinking about how your feet feel in your shoes, or how the chair feels under your bum, or how your clothes feel against your skin, until I've just said it and brought an awareness to it. If there's people who wear glasses in the room, I'll say how your glasses feel on your face, how your hat feels on your head. Use examples that are relevant to the people in the room. We can also distort information. So when I was a young girl, I remember driving past an accident scene with my grandpa. Now, my grandpa had a belief system that women were terrible drivers. And so we drove past this accident and there was a woman standing there. Now, we don't know if she caused the accident, if she was the person who got hit, if she was just a bystander who happened to witness the accident. We don't know. But because my grandpa had this belief that women were terrible drivers, as we drove past, he muttered under his breath, "Ugh, women drivers." And so he distorted what he saw in that situation to match his belief systems. And this happens all the time. If you go to an accident scene and there's 10 bystanders, you could get 10 different colors of the car or 10 different versions of the story, because everyone is going to distort what they've seen to match their belief systems. And the other thing that we do is we generalize information. So the ability to generalize information is what cuts our learning curve in half a lot of times. I learned how to drive in Canada, where we drive on one side of the road and the steering wheel's on the other side. I moved to Australia, where it's the opposite. And if I didn't have the ability to generalize, I would have had to go through the whole process of getting my license again just to learn how to drive one of those cars. If there's different colored chairs in the room, or different looking chairs, I'll say, if this was the chair I first learned to sit in, then I saw this couch or this bench or this chair over here, then I would have to learn how to resit, because I wouldn't have the ability to know that they did the same thing. So we delete, we distort, we generalize information down to 134 pieces that we're aware of consciously. This slide I'll take out. So we see the world not as we are, but we see the world as it is. And so what determines what of the 2 million pieces of information gets into our conscious awareness and what gets stored in the deep dark recesses of our unconscious mind? The filtering process, or the filtering system in our brain, is called the reticular activating system, or you may have seen it called the RAS. So what this does is, within the RAS, we hold all of our belief systems and our experiences. Now, our brains are wired to win. And so our brains don't like being wrong. Nobody likes to be wrong. So what we do is we will distort, delete, or generalize the information that we see around us to match the belief systems that we hold in our reticular activating system. And we'll filter everything in that matches our beliefs and our experiences, and we'll filter anything out that doesn't match our belief systems. And this is important to know, because if you're holding on to negative belief systems about yourself, especially limiting beliefs, so things like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, all men are evil, depending on the circumstance that I'm talking about, then I'll talk about some limiting beliefs relevant to the people in the room. Money is evil, you have to work hard to make money. Whatever the belief systems are, we will filter out opportunities that don't match those belief systems. So for example, when I was living in Australia, I was making about $60,000 a year, and I was living paycheck to paycheck, but I was living decently. So at that time, I thought that $80,000 was a lot of money. And I thought, if I could just get to $80,000, I will be set. And so I started seeing what I thought were all these opportunities to make more money. But because I had a belief system that it was not okay to make more money than my parents did, and I had a belief system that I had to work hard to make money, I took on all these really difficult, time-consuming projects. So I was working all the time and never had time to relax or have fun or hang out with my friends, and none of them made me more money. I was actually filtering out all the opportunities to make more money because that wasn't in alignment with my belief systems. So what I did was I had to work with a coach to get rid of that limiting belief about if I made more money than my family, then I wouldn't be able to connect with them. And I was then able to, like literally as soon as I worked through that belief system, within like a week, my income doubled. I recognized an opportunity to make more money, and within a week, my income doubled. So I went from 60,000 to 120,000. Now, because I still had belief systems around not being worthy, I very quickly threw all that money out the window. So it's important to know that you likely have more than one limiting belief, and you need to work on all of them. So how can you start identifying what is going to be held in your unconscious mind and what's going to be blocked out? A lot of it, sorry, these slides are in a different order than I thought. So I'll give that spiel about the RAS there, but sometimes I'll talk about it a little bit later. So I start to talk about our language and how we perceive the world. So there are 4 different ways that we process the world around us. And it's important that we know how we process the world around us, as well as how other people around us process the world. When we know how we process the world, or what our learning style is, we can empower ourselves to set up every scenario that we are in to be in alignment with our strengths. And if we know other people's belief system or learning styles, then we can set up all of our communications and our presentations to build rapport faster and to give people what they need. So there's 4 different learning styles, and we'll look at all of them. So there's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and audio digital. Now, if you guys choose to use the ebook that I have put together, there's a quiz in the ebook that people can take. It's the one out of your NLP manuals. And then I just say, it's important to know that we have the ability to do all 4 of these learning styles, but we tend to have 2 dominant styles. So our 2 dominant styles is what we revert to naturally. We can build up the ability to do the other styles. It just takes a little bit of time. Our learning styles are like a muscle. So for me personally, I'm very visual, very kinesthetic, which I'll explain what that means in a second. And I'm quite audio digital. When I started my journey, I was not auditory tonal at all. So things like listening to podcasts, or audiobooks was a real struggle for me. So now I've been practicing that in small doses, because as you learn and build things, it does tire you out. So I had to build that muscle up so that now I can listen to audiobooks when I'm driving in the car and it doesn't completely drain me. So I'm going to explain what each of these 4 learning styles looks like. And I just want you to know that I'm going to explain them to an over-exaggerated level, just so that you can get an idea of what these people are. So visual learners, they obviously take in the bulk of their information from their eyes. I don't know why that's so slow. They take in the bulk of their information from their eyes. Now they like to sit at the front of the room so that nothing blocks their view and they can see everything. They tend to dress very nicely. So visually, they look good. They will tend to wear bold colors or bold prints so that they stand out. Usually will be in designer clothing or brand names. They will definitely never clash. They will always be very well put together. All the colors will match. Sorry, I should have brought some water down. All their colors will match, and they will always look visually appealing. Their hair will always be done. If they're a woman, their makeup will be done. And then I usually make a joke for the visual people in the room. I dressed up, I did my hair for you today, which doesn't always happen. And then I say they typically tend to talk fast as well. So a visual learner would sound something like this. I want to paint a picture for you to see what I see. So I'm going to give you as much information as quickly as possible so that you can paint a picture in your head and see what I see. I am a visual learner, and when I started presenting, I had to learn how to slow myself down, because otherwise this 60 or 90-minute presentation, we would be done by now. Now, visual learners are about 40% of the population, and they will use words like, I see what you mean, I need to get a bird's eye view of that, it appears to me, and all of these lists are in the ebook if you guys choose to use it as well, or you can write your own. Auditory tonal, so these are people who process the bulk of their information through their ears. So these are the people who pick up on really subtle changes in tone and intonation. These are the people who are like, what did that tone mean? And you're like, what tone? For auditory learners, auditory tonal, it's important, especially for women in Western civilizations, to be aware of their tone. Women in Western civilizations tend to have a questioning tone. So I'll be making a statement telling you about auditory learners, and if I had a questioning tone, I would say, auditory learners pick up the bulk of their information through their ears. So it sounds like I'm asking a question. For somebody who's an auditory learner, they're going to be confused about if I'm asking them or telling them. So when you are talking to people who are auditory learners, if you want to make a statement, you need to go down at the end of your sentence. Music is going to be very important to them. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, but we always had the very best surround sound system in the house. And I could never understand why that was always so important to my dad. And when I learned this, I realized that my dad is one of those auditory learners. They will have the best stereo system. They will have the best headphones. I forgot to mention with the visual learners that they will buy a car based purely on how sexy it looks. Whereas auditory learners are more likely to spend more money on the stereo system than they will the car themselves. And they'll tend to have a melodical tone when you're talking to them. Auditory learners with audio digital make up 20% of the population, but they haven't been able to split auditory and audio digital. And auditory people will say things like, that rings a bell, give me your ear, that's an earful. Kinesthetic learners are the people who learn by doing. Now, there's two important parts to the kinesthetic learner. Firstly, they need to be hands-on so that they can learn by doing and feeling, but they also feel the weight of the words when we talk to them. So kinesthetic learners will typically be slower to respond and slower to talk because they feel like they need to, thank you, they feel like they need to process the weight of the words that you've said to them, and then they need to process what they're going to say back to you before they say it. I gave this presentation a couple months ago, and this woman, when I said that, she was like, "Ah, I get it now. I thought for so long that my husband was ignoring me when I asked him a question." She said, "I can see I'm very I'm very visual, and my husband is very kinesthetic, and I would ask him a question and he wouldn't answer, so I would ask it again and then he would answer. And I always thought he was ignoring me, but now I recognize that he is just kinesthetic and he needs more time to process." And so I said to her, "Thank you. I will send you a bill for my marriage counseling." So they tend to speak very slowly. They need time to process. They also dress for comfort. So they will find fabrics that feel nice against their skin. They will dress in a manner that's comfortable for them. They'll find the most comfortable seat in the room to sit in, so they're likely to sit on an aisle seat so that they can move around if they need to. This is another 40% of the population. If they were to buy a car, it's highly unlikely they would buy a two-door because it's not comfortable to have to get out to let somebody else in. So they're more likely to be driving a four-door, and these are going to be the people who love your minivans. Kinesthetic processors will use words like, "I can't get a grasp of what you're saying," "it all boils down to," "chip off the old block," etc. Your audio digital learners are kind of your stereotypical nerd. They love facts and figures. So for the audio digital people in the room, I started with some numbers so that I wouldn't lose you. These people are very logical and intellectual. They love stats. They love facts and figures. They need to know all the details and numbers. They don't really care for the fluff, so they will tend to be quite monotone. They replicate facts quickly and easily, which basically means that they could read a book or a paper or watch a video one time, and they would be able to give a presentation that was almost word for word back to you without having to refer to any notes. So I told you that I was audio digital. When it comes to something I'm passionate about, so health or mindset, I replicate very, very quickly. I can watch somebody present one day, and then I can go and present almost the exact same presentation the next day without having to look at my notes. These people are likely to talk to themselves, and they memorize steps and procedures very quickly. Audio digital predicates are things like sense, experience, understand, calculate. If audio digitals were buying a car, they would already know the facts and figures about the car. They would know the gas mileage. They would know all the other things that are important about a car. And they would go to the dealership to test the salesman. And if the salesman doesn't know and just makes something up that they know not to be true, they won't buy from that person. So let's look at how these learning styles interact with each other. And so I have four spots on the stage, and when I stand in spot one, I'm in visual. When I stand in spot two, I'm auditory or kinesthetic, depending on the order. When I'm in spot three, I do kinesthetic or auditory, and then spot four is audio digital. So I start in visual and say, what do you think visual thinks about the other people? Well, visuals, they don't mind the auditories. They tend to think that the kinesthetics are quite slow and potentially dumb, and they just think that the audio digitals are boring. And then I move to the second spot. The auditory, they like to listen to other people, but they tend to get frustrated with the other three learning styles because nobody ever listens to them. They want somebody to ask about them. Kinesthetic, they think that the visual are trying to hide something, or maybe a bit slimy, and that's why they talk so fast and they're trying to pull a fast one over them. And the audio digital doesn't really care about all the other stuff. They just want to get down to business. So then I go back to the first spot and I say, if you were teaching, what would a visual need? What would an auditory, kinesthetic, and an audio digital? And if you were selling to a visual, auditory, kinesthetic, audio, digital, what would they need? So standing in the visual spot first, what would you need to be aware of if you were presenting, if you were trying to sell something to a visual, or if you were talking to a visual? Well, you would need to look nice. You would need something for them to look at, something that looked good. So your website would have to look good. Your brochures would have to look good. Your business cards would have to look good. Auditory, you can sell over the phone. All they need is to hear the information. The kinesthetic, it would be good if you could give them something to touch or to do. So give them a brochure to touch. Give them something that they can feel, do, or touch. And the audio digital, give them facts. Give them the facts and figures and the science. Now, we talked about how we delete, distort, and generalize things before, and how our reticular activating system will then decide what gets into our conscious awareness and what gets out. Now, one of the major factors in that happening is the language that we use. So we don't actually communicate in words. We communicate in pictures. So everything that I have said to you tonight, you have gotten a picture of in your head. And if I wanted you to have a particular picture, I've either drawn it up here for you or it's been on the PowerPoint slide. So there's some important words that impact the pictures that you get in your brain. So one of those words is don't, or it's not, any derivative of not or negatives. So our unconscious mind is unable to process negatives. Let me give you an example. Don't think of a purple frog. What picture did you all just get in your head? What happens is your conscious mind has to say, your unconscious mind has to get a picture of what I've said, the purple frog, and your conscious mind has to come in over top and says, no, don't think of that, think of something different like a pink tree. So now you all have a pink tree in your head. Now, when we set goals, most times people focus on what they don't want. When I was working as a personal trainer, I would say, what's your goal? I don't want to be fat anymore. Now, what that does is it puts a picture of what we don't want into our head. Now, our reticular activating system is like a GPS. Whatever picture we put into that GPS is where we're going as quickly as possible. When I was living in Australia, my roommate, both of us were gluten intolerant, except that she had it worse than I did. She basically ate like a crumb or a crouton. She would look like she was 8 months pregnant the next day. She would get so bloated. So one day we decided to go out for dinner. And of all places for two people who are gluten intolerant to go to, we went to a burger joint. Now I ordered first and I said, can I have such and such burger with no bun? There was a gluten-free option, but I think it tastes like cardboard. So I just ordered with no bun. And I know that she heard me because she said, that sounds amazing. I'll have the same on the poppy seed bun. Now I should preface that just a couple days before we went out for this dinner, she had come in and asked me if I would create a gym program for her because she didn't want to be overweight anymore. So what picture did she have in her head? Overweight. So when she orders this burger on a poppy seed bun, which is full of gluten, I said to her, what are you doing? You're going to be in so much pain tomorrow. And she said, well, I didn't want to get the gluten-free bun because it tastes like cardboard and there was no other options. And I said, you just heard me order my burger with no bun. And she was like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. So her unconscious mind, because it was holding on to this picture of her being overweight, which is what she looks like and feels like when she's bloated from eating gluten, had completely deleted the option for her to get the burger with no bun. So think about it. How often do you do this with your goals where you focus on what you don't want? Now, it's also interesting that when I tell people this, they'll switch their goals to say something like, instead of I don't want debt, I'll get out of debt. Well, the focus is still on the debt. And whatever you focus on expands. I was working with a financial planner this past year, and so this is somebody who helps other people with their money. And she came to me in September and she said, I'd set a goal to get out of debt this year, and I have more debt now than I've ever had before. Well, of course, because you're focused on debt. So your brain says, well, how can we create more of this? She went to a trip for a month to Madagascar. She paid for it on credit. She paid me for our sessions on credit. She paid for all these things on credit, and that was racking up her debt because that is what she was focused on. So when you use the word not, just be aware that your unconscious mind is unable to process it. Now, it's also worth noting that there is a positive way that you can use this word. If somebody came to me and they said, oh, changing your mindset is really hard. And I said, no, it's not. It's easy. They would look at me and they would say, what do you know? You don't understand me. I'm not going to work with you. Because I would have broken rapport with them. So when people come to me and they say, this thing is going to be really hard, changing my vocabulary is going to be really hard, I say to them, look, it's not going to be easy. I've kept rapport with them because on a conscious level, hard and not easy are the exact same thing. On an unconscious level, however, I've said something completely different. I've suggested to the unconscious mind that it will be easy, and because I've done that, their unconscious mind takes on the suggestion and starts looking for the easy way to make the change. Another word that you should look at removing from your vocabulary is the word but. So the word but negates everything that came before it. And typically how we structure our sentences is we say the positive, but, and then the negative. So what happens is you could say something to somebody like, you did really well today, but you missed that sale. Where is the emphasis? What are we suggesting is the more important thing? That they missed the sale or they missed the goal. Now, how many people have heard of the feedback sandwich, where if you want to give somebody feedback, you give them the positive, then the negative, then the positive? Depending on the audience and the rapport that I have, I'll call it the shit sandwich too, because the shit's in the middle. So when we give somebody feedback, we want to start with the positive, because here's the thing. In between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, there's this thing called the gatekeeper. And the conscious mind's job is to keep the unconscious mind safe. The unconscious mind is highly suggestive, and it doesn't know the difference between fiction and reality, and it doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. So if something gets into the unconscious mind, if a suggestion gets into the unconscious mind, we hold it to be true. So if we were to start with the negative, the person would feel like they were under attack and the gatekeeper would close. I'm sure you can think of people in your life that you don't trust, or maybe they feel slimy, kind of like the used car salesman stereotype. As soon as you get around them and you feel that discomfort, that gatekeeper closes, and it doesn't matter what they say to you, your unconscious mind will not take on that suggestion. The reason that I start with numbers and a story about myself is so that your conscious mind feels safe enough to open up that gatekeeper, so that absolutely everything I say tonight is going into your unconscious mind. So that's why it's important to start with the positive. Most people, when they're delivering the feedback sandwich, though, they say but in between. So they give the positive, then they say but. As soon as your conscious mind hears but, it slams that gatekeeper shut, and the suggestion or the thing for improvement that you're about to give in the negative doesn't get into the unconscious mind, because the person is not open to it. So start replacing but with and. The next word is try, and I usually do a demo here. I take my water bottle and I get somebody from the audience to come up and I say, can you try and pick up my water bottle, please? And they will attempt to pick up my water bottle. They'll usually pick it up, and I'll say, okay, you picked it up. I want you to try and pick it up. And then they'll either pick it up again, or they'll set it down and they'll just stare at it. And I say, okay, well, now you're just looking at it, or you just picked it up again. I want you to try. And then when they're thoroughly confused, I say, thank you, that was a brilliant demonstration. Everyone give them a round of applause. You can have a seat. The only place that try exists is on the rugby field. And if you're not familiar with rugby, a try is essentially the touchdown or the score. The word try means a feeble attempt. And so when we use the word try, we suggest to our unconscious mind and the unconscious minds of the people that we're talking to that whatever it is we said that we would try and do is not important enough to fully commit to, so therefore it's okay if we don't do it. So if I say to you, and I point to someone in the audience, I will try and call you tomorrow. Do you have any faith that I will call you? No. And even worse, I've just told you that you're not important enough to commit to. If I just say to myself, I'm going to try and go to the gym tomorrow, I've just told myself that my health isn't worth committing to, so there's no point in even trying. When we use the word try, we give ourselves an excuse to fail. So we actually set ourselves up for fail. So definitely take try out of your vocabulary. One word that I do want you to start using is the word yet. And yet implies to our unconscious mind that even though we haven't done or achieved or gotten something yet, that we will be able to. So Scandinavian countries have actually asked their teachers, to start using this more often on report cards. So the teachers will say, Billy hasn't been able to do this math problem yet. What that tells Billy's mind, unconscious mind, is that if he keeps working at it, he will be able to achieve it because the teacher believes that he can. The word yet actually puts us into a growth mindset. So there is a woman named Carolyn Duick, and she has done a lot of studies into mindset. And she's found that there's two types of mindset, fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. So what happened was they took a math class and they split the class into 3 groups. One group was the control group who received no feedback in any way. Group A was a group that only got feedback based on outcome. So they got praised when they got the problem right. Group B, they got feedback or praise based on effort. So as long as they put in effort, they got praise. Now it's important to know that we are wired to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. So pleasure, feedback or praise is pleasure, and not getting it, the absence of feedback or praise, is painful. And what they found was that as the math problems got harder and harder, the less likely that group A, the outcome-based group, would be to engage in that problem because they wanted to go back to the easy problems that they knew they could solve so they would get the praise. Whereas group B, they were happy to continue doing harder and harder problems because they knew that either way they were going to get positive feedback. Now, I believe this is where the concept of participation trophies comes from. And I will preface this by saying I'm not a believer in participation trophies, and I think that we've gotten this message slightly wrong. That being said, so in life, we do need to get to an outcome, but we'll never get the appropriate outcome if there's never any effort. So if we put somebody into a fixed mindset where we only ever focus on outcome, and I especially bring this up if I'm talking to a sports team, most particularly hockey dads, where if you only praise your kid when their hockey team wins or when they score goals, they aren't going to want to play the harder teams or the higher levels because they are afraid they won't get the praise. Whereas if we talk to them about effort first, if we say to them, what do you think you did really well? You put in a lot of effort, then we focus on the outcome. So using that feedback sandwich, you played really well today, you put in a lot of effort, and you didn't necessarily score that goal yet. You didn't score 1 goal yet, or you didn't score 2 goals yet. You didn't get a hat trick yet. That will put them in a growth mindset where they will want to continue putting in the effort so that they eventually get the outcome that we're looking for. But outcome will never, ever happen without an effort behind it. So we need to foster that effort and that growth mindset in order to get kids to where we want them to go. And that's actually where I end this. This was a little bit of a longer presentation, but that's basically the essence of the 60-minute presentation. If they do happen to go for 90 minutes, most people don't. I talk about how you're the average of your environment. So just paying attention to the fact that the 5 people you spend the most time with, you are most highly influenced by. And then I just end it by asking if there's any questions. Any questions? Everyone looks thoroughly, all of this, you know, everything that I said tonight, you guys know. We've gone through it multiple times. You now have this video that you can rewatch. And yeah, you know all this. It's just putting it all together so that it becomes a super highway in your brain. Any questions?
Thanks for putting it to video. I've seen you do it a couple of times in the Ironside stuff, but it's just a matter of how to keep it organized so it kind of flows nicely one into the other, which I think is super helpful. And I'm a creature of habit, so I really like to be able to have something that I can play over and over and over again. So thank you for doing it.
Pleasure. So I think what we do is I'm going to split this into like 4 sections, I think. I'll have a look at it again and let you know what the sections are. And then I think the easiest way for you guys to get this is for us to schedule like a 1-hour talk where you're presenting 15-minute chunks. And then you just focus on getting that chunk right with your stories. I mean, you can use my stories where you need to as well, if you can't think of a story. I didn't have all these stories when I first started, and as I started going, like stories would pop into my head as I talked. But I think if we break it into 15-minute sections and we book a couple times for you guys to present to me, then I can give you feedback, and we'll just do it one-on-one without the others on the call. How does everyone feel about that? Cool. Any other questions? No? All right, cool. So I'll get this group and everything set up in the next couple days, and then we'll talk about whether or not we want to do the call on the 23rd, closer to the 23rd. I'll be in Kentucky by then, so if we need to do it a little bit earlier, that would be fine by me, so it'd be 9 o'clock there, but if we have to keep it at that time, at this time, we can. Cool?
I'm on call the 23rd, so I may or may not be around.
Okay, and Corey, I think you said you had something on, was that right? Or was it Laura? Laura, could you definitely make that one?
Double check. I think hockey's done by then. Yeah, the 23rd, I teach a class that night.
Okay, cool. So if Laura happens to be the only one who pops on, then we'll do one of your presentations that night, Laura, to get out of the way.
Sure.
And I'll send you guys a link to book an hour time slot with me, so we'll end up needing 4. I'll let you know what the 4 sections are going to be. You don't have to necessarily start at the beginning. You can start with whatever you're most comfortable with presenting. Cool. All right. Anything else that you need from me? So I need to give you the post to put up. I'll give you an email that you can send out to gyms and things. I have to compile, give me until the end of the week, I'll compile the list of gyms and yoga studios that I've emailed into a database. And I'll give you the presentation. Anything else you need from me at this point? I'm gonna write these down just so. So we need the email to gyms, gym database. Cool, awesome. I will get all that set up for you. Now I'm going to launch a program. I'm about starting a coaching business and getting to 6 figures in your first year. So I'll put you guys into that group as well. I don't know how many, I've got a couple people so far. So cool. Awesome. That's it. Enjoy your Sunday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Feels very weird not being in the same like place as you guys, by the way.
Yeah, it's cold here. You won't mind missing it.
It's not warm here, but it's like a humid cold, so.
I have friends who went to Vegas this week and it was like 10 degrees in Vegas. I was like, why would you spend the money going?
Yeah,
It's
I was in
cold.
Vegas last week and it was shitty. Like I was,
Yeah. If I'm paying for money to get away from the winter, I better get away from the winter.
yeah, it was like 6 degrees here this morning. But it's been raining all weekend, so it's super damp. Of course, I have to go outside now with Maddox. So
Have a good walk.
thank you. I got to take him out now.
Okay.
All right.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Bye.